This Elon Musk, the guy shooting rockets into space and building self-driving cars, well, he's now shaking things up in the U.S. government.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're diving into this story about Musk's crusade to slash government spending on consultants.
Okay, interesting.
And get this, we're talking about a lot of money, like a whopping $6 billion a year.
Wow, that's a huge amount.
Yeah, it is. And it's not just about saving money, though. This has big implications for taxpayers like you.
Right, of course.
And consulting giants like Deloitte and Accenture. Even the jobs of federal workers could be on the line.
Yeah, I can see how this would be a pretty big deal. So to really understand the potential impact, I think we need to start by looking at why the government spends so much on consultants in the first place.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, they often provide really specialized knowledge and experience that the government just might not have in-house.
Right.
Especially in fields that are, changing so rapidly, like cybersecurity, defense technology, artificial intelligence. For example, just imagine the Department of Defense trying to develop a new cybersecurity strategy without the expertise of consultants who are really, on the cutting edge of cyber warfare techniques.
That's a good point.
That's the kind of expertise gap we risk creating here.
So Musk is basically saying that the government should be doing more of this work itself.
Exactly. He's spearheading this whole initiative through the Department of Government Efficiency.
Okay.
Or DOGE, as they call it.
DOGE.
Yeah.
Classic Musk.
It's part of a larger push to streamline government operations and reduce that reliance on those external consultants.
Okay, so DOGE aside, let's talk about who wins and who loses here,
Right, the winners and losers.
Yeah.
Well, on the surface, taxpayers could benefit from reduced government spending. I mean, if the government can cut down on those expensive consulting contracts, it could theoretically free up funds for other priorities.
Yeah.
Or even, lead to lower taxes.
Now that's what we like to hear. But wouldn't it be ironic if trying to save money by cutting consultants actually leads to higher costs in the long run?
It's definitely a possibility.
Yeah, how do we make sure we're getting the expertise we need without breaking the bank?
Right. Well, that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's always that risk that, cutting corners could lead to bigger problems down the line.
Yeah.
Think about a major government IT project, for example.
Okay, yeah.
Consultants often bring experience from managing similar projects in the private sector.
Right.
Which can help to avoid those, costly overruns and delays.
Yeah.
Cutting them out might seem like a quick win at first, but it could backfire if the project goes off the rails.
Yeah, that's a good point. And what about the consulting firms themselves?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this must be a pretty big blow to their business.
Absolutely. We're talking about major players here, like Deloitte, Accenture, Booz, Allen Hamilton, Guidehouse, IBM.
Wow.
Musk's initiative has already resulted in the cancellation of over 30 contracts.
Really?
Costing these firms billions of dollars.
Wow, billions with a B. That's a lot of lost revenue.
It is. And in fact, one of the canceled contracts involved Deloitte's work on modernizing the visa application process.
Oh, wow.
Which could potentially delay some much-needed improvements to that system.
That's a bummer. And speaking of potential losses, what about federal workers?
Yeah.
Could this lead to job cuts within the government as well?
Well, it's a complex issue. On the one hand, if the government is trying to bring more work in-house, you might think that would create more opportunities for federal employees.
Right.
But the reality is more complicated.
Okay.
Think about it this way. If you were a federal employee in a field like cybersecurity, this whole situation might feel pretty uncertain.
Yeah.
More responsibility, but also the possibility of cuts.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. What do you think, listener of Ultralister? Would you feel optimistic or worried?
It's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag for sure.
Yeah.
You might get more responsibility, which could be good for your career. But there's also that fear that budget cuts could eventually lead to job losses. And it's not just about, the number of jobs, it's about the types of jobs.
Precisely. If the government decides it doesn't need as many consultants for IT projects, for example,
Right.
that could impact not just IT specialists, but also project managers, analysts, support staff within those departments.
Yeah.
The ripple effects could be significant.
They really could. So we've talked about taxpayers and consulting firms and federal workers, but I'm also curious about the risks involved in this whole push to cut back on consultants. What are some potential downsides we need to consider?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is the risk of creating those expertise gaps we talked about earlier, like even with training programs, it takes time to develop that kind of deep knowledge and experience that a lot of consultants bring to the table.
So it's not just about filling positions. It's about having people who can actually hit the ground running and get stuff done.
Exactly. Take the Department of Veterans Affairs, for example.
Okay.
They rely heavily on consultants to help manage healthcare services for millions of veterans. These consultants often have really specialized knowledge of, complex medical conditions and the unique needs of veterans.
Right.
Cutting back too quickly could really disrupt care and lead to, longer wait times for appointments and treatments.
Yeah, that's a real concern. And it's not just healthcare. I imagine there are similar risks in infrastructure development, environmental protection, even disaster response.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about a major natural disaster like a hurricane or an earthquake.
Right.
The government often relies on consultants with expertise in logistics engineering, emergency management to help coordinate relief efforts. Cutting back on those resources could really hamper the government's ability to respond effectively in a crisis.
So while saving money is important, we need to make sure we're not sacrificing essential services or, putting people at risk in the process.
Right.
But let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Couldn't you argue that government agencies should be more proactive about developing that internal expertise so they're not so reliant on consultants in the first place?
That's a valid point. And some agencies are doing a good job of building up that internal expertise.
Oh.
But there are challenges. Government salaries often can't compete with the private sector.
Right.
Especially for, highly specialized skills. So attracting and retaining top talent can be really difficult.
It's kind of a catch-22, isn't it? The government needs consultants because it lacks expertise, but it's hard to develop that expertise if you can't attract and keep the best people.
Precisely. And it's not just about money. Government work can sometimes be, bureaucratic and slow-moving.
Yeah.
Which can be frustrating for people who are used to the faster pace of the private sector.
I can see how that would be a turnoff for some people. So it seems like there are a lot of factors at play here. It's not just about cutting costs. It's about finding that right balance between, leveraging external expertise and building internal capacity.
You've hit the nail on the head, and it's important to remember that there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
What works for one agency or situation might not work for another.
So flexibility and adaptability are key. But I'm wondering, how do we measure success in this kind of situation? Is it simply about, how much money is saved?
That's a good question. Cost savings are certainly important, but they shouldn't be the only metric.
Okay.
We also need to consider the quality and effectiveness of government services.
Right.
Are projects being delivered on time and within budget? Are citizens satisfied with the services they're receiving? Are we making progress in key areas like technology, infrastructure, national security?
Yeah, those are all important factors to consider. And it sounds like this whole initiative is going to require a lot of careful planning and monitoring and adjustment along the way.
Absolutely. It's not a set it and forget it kind of thing.
Right.
The government will need to be constantly evaluating the impact of these changes and making adjustments as needed.
Okay.
And that will require transparency and accountability so that taxpayers can see where their money is going and how it's being used.
That makes sense. But I'm also thinking about the human element here. What about the consultants who are losing their contracts? What happens to them?
That's a valid concern. Some consultants may be able to find other opportunities in the private sector. But for others, it could mean a period of unemployment or a shift to a different line of work. It's important to acknowledge that these changes will have real-world consequences for people's livelihoods.
It's a reminder that we're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about people's lives and careers.
Exactly. And as we navigate this complex landscape, it's important to remember that both government employees and consultants play really important roles in serving the public.
Right.
The goal should be to find ways to work together effectively to deliver the best possible outcomes for citizens.
So it's not about us versus them. It's about finding a way to collaborate and leverage everyone's skills and expertise for the greater good.
Precisely. And it's about having an open and honest dialogue about the challenges and opportunities involved.
Well said. I feel like we've really unpacked the complexities of this issue, but I'm always curious to hear what our listeners think.
I agree. What stands out to you, listener? What questions do you have about Musk's initiative and its potential impact?
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from those astronomical sums the government spends on consultants to the ripple effects of Musk's initiative. It's clear that this isn't, a simple issue.
It really highlights that delicate balance, between fiscal responsibility and making sure that the government has the expertise it needs to function effectively.
Yeah, for sure.
And we've seen how this impacts everyone from taxpayers and federal workers to those giants of the consulting world.
We even touched on that human side of the story, acknowledging, the potential disruption to people's lives and careers.
Right. And that brings us to the question we always like to leave our listeners with. What would you do? Imagine you're in the hot seat.
Oh, boy.
Responsible for balancing the budget, while making sure that the government can deliver on its promises to the people.
Yeah, it's a tough call. On one hand, you want to, be a good steward of taxpayer dollars, trim the fat wherever possible. But on the other hand, you don't want to cut corners and, risk jeopardizing those critical services or falling behind in areas like technology and security.
Right. Think about it this way. You're responsible for ensuring veterans have access to quality health care.
Yeah.
Protecting the nation from cyber attacks, maintaining critical infrastructure like roads and bridges, all while facing pressure to reduce spending.
Right. What's your approach?
What would you do?
It's a real balancing act.
Yeah.
Maybe you focus on building up that internal expertise in, key areas, even if it means investing in training programs and offering more competitive salaries.
Yeah, maybe you explore partnerships with universities or private sector companies to, share knowledge and resources. Or maybe you take a more targeted approach, only using consultants for very specific projects where their expertise is absolutely essential.
Right. And of course, you have to consider those political realities. Can you make those tough decisions that might be unpopular with certain groups?
Yeah, are you willing to take risks and potentially face criticism if things don't go as planned?
I mean, these are the kinds of dilemmas that leaders grapple with every day.
Right, and there are no easy answers. But that's what makes this whole topic so fascinating.
It really does.
It forces us to think critically about the role of government, the value of expertise, and the trade-offs we're willing to make as a society.
As we wrap up this deep dive, remember to keep an eye on the long game. How is the government adapting to these changes? Are they investing in the future, or are they just, kicking the can down the road?
And what about those potential expertise gaps? Are they being addressed proactively, or are we setting ourselves up for problems down the line?
Those are questions we'll continue to explore, but for now, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of, the complexities of this issue and left you with some food for thought. Thanks for listening.